torturing her? Okay, cool, I'll just behead her. And then when Sam steps in, he puts the blade on Sam, and that's the mistake. Because he threatened Sam in front of Dean Winchester. Dean is still, somehow, remarkably, using his words, trying to relate to Gordon, and Gordon reveals that his sister wasn't killed by a vampire, she was turned, and he killed her himself. Dean's reaction is, you did what? Because I know for a fact that if Sam got turned into a vampire, Dean would, like, start taking iron supplements or something so that Sam could just, like, drink him.
Yep.
They're not doing it. They can't.
Honestly, yeah, because they just prioritize family so much. So there's that one disconnect with Gordon, is that there are no lines drawn whatsoever.
Yeah. And it's that vital disconnection there that I think finally snaps Dean out of it and just saying, like, okay, we can't continue this. Like, this ends now.
Yeah. Sam realizes that Gordon knew these vampires weren't killing people, and Gordon cuts Sam's arm and drips the blood on Lenore's face until she, like, vamps out. But Lenore is a badass, and she pulls herself together and, like, turns her head away, and that is the thing that makes Dean go, okay, you know what? She didn't drink my brother, and she could have. We're good. Dean has Sam pick Lenore up and carry her out, and Dean keeps Gordon at gunpoint and says Gordon has to go through him if he wants Lenore and Eli and all the rest of them. Gordon disarms, so Dean stupidly unloads his gun, and then Dean gets sucker punched. At Q, maybe the weirdest fight scene that I could have really imagined for this, because they're in a physical fight, but while they are fighting, Gordon is still trying to convince Dean that they're alike and Sam is the one who's different, and that he should just give in to the fact that they're alike. I don't understand why Gordon is this invested in him and Dean having this relationship. I don't get it.
Maybe he just doesn't like being defied.
Maybe. Dean then just, like, ties Gordon to a chair and says that he might be like Gordon and he might not be, but right now Gordon's the one who's tied up, and that was a weird open-ended threat. I'm not sure what he meant by that.
Odd end.
Yeah, I was like, I don't know where that's going.
Yeah. That's the point. He's not going anywhere.
Then it's morning, and Sam comes up and reports that Lenore and the others got away. And Dean says they'll have someone come in a few days to untie Gordon, and then he punches Gordon so hard that Gordon's whole chair topples over, and he's like, okay, we're good to go. And they just leave him there. Dean and Sam go outside, and Dean's like, hey, Sam, what if you just hit me in the face? And Sam's like, Gordon just beat the shit out of you, man. I don't need to add to that. Dean says he wishes that they never took this job. It's jacked everything up. They've been hunting their entire lives, and what else have they killed that didn't deserve to be killed? Dean says John wasn't perfect, and he raised them to hate monsters, and Dean does. He enjoys killing monsters, he hates them, and he wanted to kill Lenore. Sam says the fact that Dean didn't is what matters, and that he's just gonna have to stick around to keep being a pain in Dean's ass and making him think about all this.
Which is something that Gordon never had, too, when you think about it.
Yeah,
just
he's
completely
a loner.
Isolated.
Dean's obviously deeply troubled, but still by the implications of all of this, and we get a very close shot on his brooding face before he gets in the car and they speed off into the sunrise. The sunrise.
Yeah, with, don't forget, a J.J. Abrams-esque lens flare.
Yes.
Hell yeah.
As is tradition on this show. But yeah, that is where the episode ends. Do you guys want to get right into segments, or do you have more to say about the episode itself?
Real quick, yeah, I just wanted to talk about more like the directing and stuff. Because I know I kind of said that a lot of this episode seems very subversive. Like, the beginning shot, right? We think the girl in the beginning would be an innocent person or a human, and Gordon must be the monster. And then
it turns out that's not true.
Right. And then even the smaller details, like at the mill, the vampire there, and then the vampire at the beginning of the episode, it's kind of shot from their point of view, which again would put Gordon as the monster. And by the end of the episode, we kind of realize he is. So I thought those were kind of interesting choices to...
The way
I noticed the same thing.
They set those two vampires up to die is often how we see people who are victim of monster attacks, but in this case it's monsters. And
so this makes it like what the second time that the monster has been a human, but like the first time the monster's been a human in an episode with other monsters.
Where the monsters were just living life and not hurting anybody.
Monsters are the victims.
This is always where I kind of thought about like the turning point was in terms of like what is a monster, but then like having to do this podcast and like go from season 1, I realized like that's a theme that's been in play for like a long, like since the first season. That's kind of been a theme.
I feel like it kind of got a very rough start in the episode with the shapeshifter, as I remember saying, but like, yeah, I think it was in play very strongly throughout the first season, and it's just in full force here.
Yeah.
But this is also, feels like the first episode where they kind of define a monster as not what you are, but what you choose to be, which will be a theme later, but it's really just like Gordon chose to do all the wrong things, and so the entire build up to the episode was you're taken out, just like we would a monster, basically.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm. Like, even if you are, like, some sort of supernatural creature that actually does need to kill to survive, you can live life without being a monster.
Yeah, that's been a theme for a few of the episodes, but I feel like this, for me, feels like the first time, like, that Dean really gets that fact. I feel like Sam's been grappling with this.
And I think Sam has to, considering his own powers, right?
Yeah, that's really been the driving point. Is like even pre-pilot Sam's having these dreams, and then those dreams start coming true, like with Jess dying, and like he's, as those are progressing, he's more and more being like, I need to start defining a monster as something else because I am increasingly displaying capabilities that would be considered supernatural.
Yeah, and Dean is kind of justified in his own right because he's been hunting alone or just with his dad, which I would imagine is kind of depressing and lonely anyways.
Yeah.
Where all these monsters just want to take him out, and there's probably really no lines of gray because, you know, you just charge and try to kill them as fast as possible before they get you. So they both kind of have to start struggling with this.
Well, for Dean's entire life, like, he hasn't really been given any opportunities or really seen the need to get to know a monster as a person. To him, it's a monster, we kill it, we need to save people from monsters.
Yeah.
But in this episode, I think he doesn't give himself enough credit because, well, he's Dean, but he does prove that he is capable of doing things that John wasn't capable of. He's capable of saving a monster because they aren't hurting people.
Yeah, totally. I guess I'm gonna go on to death count if everybody's cool with that.
Very cool.
Sure.
Yeah.
Okay. This week we saw no human deaths. The only deaths we saw were those 2 vampires, maybe 3. That keeps our on-screen total at 153 and the on and off-screen total at 936 plus.
A nice modest amount.
We're approaching 1,000, guys. Help us reach it.
For the 3rd episode of season 2, correct?
We also tried to assign an MVP of the week, so let's see who all of our guests would like to nominate as this week's most valuable person. Let's start with Meredith.
My MVP was Lenore. I think she's a really interesting character, and I love how strong she is at resisting, like, her vampire nature and holding true to her beliefs. So she was really cool, and I'm glad we got to meet her.
Vail, how about you?
I think I'm gonna have to say Dean on this one, just because he kind of has, like, all of these conflicting character arcs we talked about going on at once, and I feel like he would kind of embody the viewer a bit more than any other character, as you're like, this is a vampire, but wait, it's a good person? Like, do we really want to trust them?
Yeah, Dean was awesome. And Jenn?
Yeah, I'm gonna also go with Lenore. I really liked her character as well, and I think within the entire story, the 15 seasons long of Supernatural, she's a really important piece in kind of confronting the idea that, you know, what constitutes a monster, and so she really starts that conversation in a very obvious way, which I like.
Lenore is awesome. I'm also almost mad I didn't make her mine. I put Sam for mine because I feel like he was the moral compass, as he sometimes needs to be. Also, I like that he knew exactly what was going on with Dean. Dean won't talk to him about anything that he's feeling, but Sam just knows. Doesn't need to be told.
He was definitely the big brains of this episode.
Also, he had to trust Lenore, and I feel like that was a leap of faith moment for him.
Yeah, especially because, like, he's the only one of the main characters that the vampires actually attacked.
Let's put this the show to the Bechdel test. Did we have 2 named women in this episode?
Was the first vampire named?
She wasn't named, but we did have Lenore, and we had Ellen.
Oh, yeah, we did.
Yep.
But they didn't talk to one another, which
that
means
we know of.
which means that this episode did not pass the Bechdel test.
Yeah. Sorry, now I'm just picturing them, like, meeting up, being friends. It's all great.
Yeah.
The next segment is our mythology section. This week's case of the week was vampires. I'm just going to hand this over to Meredith. Vail or Jenn, if you have something to add, you're definitely welcome to add your thoughts. But I'm just going to let Meredith tell me what she's got.
We discussed this just now, but last time I rewatched this episode, I realized that the real monster is Gordon, so I researched vampire hunters instead.
Ooh. Did you find anything besides Buffy? Was Buffy the first, 20 words?
No, actually. Surprisingly. I didn't actually research Buffy. I was researching, history stuff and mythology. I think I mentioned Abraham Van Helsing in here somewhere. Anyway, so a vampire hunter is a person who hunts vampires. Pretty self-explanatory. Vampires and vampire hunters have developed alongside each other throughout the centuries, so wherever you have darkness, you'll have people who want to banish it. Pretty natural. Most of the vampire hunters I've encountered are just local villagers who want to get rid of a threat. I haven't encountered any personally, but in stories. In Slavic cultures, they'd sometimes use a seer to help them identify the vampire, which is pretty cool. I didn't find any career vampire hunters in my research this time, but I am pretty sure they existed. I think I've heard of a couple, and I'm going to get back to that in a later episode because it needs to be researched.
Okay.
In literature, the vampire hunter everyone thinks of is obviously Buffy, but after that, they think of Abraham Van Helsing from Dracula.
Right.
Van Helsing was a middle-aged professor from Stockholm. Very cool. And with the exception of Mina Harker, definitely the smartest person in the book. And I think there's a movie where he was played by Hugh Jackman, which is endlessly hilarious to me because he was definitely not Hugh Jackman in the book.
That is really the goal, though, to do something cool enough that they're just we don't care what you were like. We'll just let Hugh Jackman.
You're an intellectual.
Jackman's a pretty good choice.
That would be my goal. I mean, I don't think Hugh Jackman would ever be in a situation to play me as a very female-presenting person, but...
I'm pretty sure, none of the characters in that book could be played by Hugh Jackman. They just don't seem brawny enough, except for, that one cowboy dude. But anyway, most of them were, doctors and women and, professors and,
yes,
Jonathan,
the two genders, doctors and women.
In the Victorian era. We're getting off topic.
Yes, we are.
So today we're going to discuss one vampire hunting event in particular. Have you guys ever heard of the Highgate Vampire?
I don't think so.
Is that the Highgate Cemetery?
Yes.
Yes,
so the person I'm going to focus on is a man named David Farrant. He was a character. Farrant lived in London, England during the 1970s, where he made headlines because he was convinced that the Highgate Cemetery was being haunted by a vampire. For those of you who are unfamiliar with the Highgate Cemetery, it's not just a little graveyard with headstones. It's huge, for one thing. It's a very famous Victorian cemetery with thousands of grave sites, many of which are actually Gothic-style tombs and mausoleums. It's also where a lot of famous people are buried, including Karl Marx. It's a place with lots of nature, such as trees, small animals. So what I'm saying is David Farrant knew how to choose locations. This is the perfect place for a vampire to live. Just look up photos of the Highgate Cemetery. You will not regret it. All right, so in 1970, Mr. Farrant claimed that a vampire was haunting Highgate Cemetery, and that the vampire was a Romanian nobleman/practitioner of the dark arts who was brought to England in a coffin and buried in the cemetery in the 18th century, which you should know is actually pretty close to the plot of Dracula. And there was another hunter with him named Sean Manchester, who claimed that modern-day Satanists had woken up the vampire and they needed to find out which grave the vampire was buried in and then stake the head and burn it, which is probably overkill. So they tried. Didn't work out. Farrant made it into the London Times. I looked in the archive. The first one is from September 30th, 1970. And the headline, who is Man Who Sought Vampire in Cemetery Cleared. So that's him. Also, the article says he was 24 at the time, which is actually really explains a lot. Because 24-year-olds are stupid. So he was arrested for being in the Highgate Cemetery and carrying around a crucifix and a wooden stake. And he told the court that he was trying to find a vampire that he believed was haunting the cemetery. That went about as well as you thought it did. Apparently, the defense lawyer told the court that it wasn't unlawful for a person to seek out a vampire, and he's not wrong. It is, however, unlawful to desecrate graves, but Farrant pleaded not guilty and was cleared. 4 years later, he shows up in the headlines again, and it's way more fun this time because in June of 1974, Farrant was on trial in the Old Bailey Courthouse, which is a very famous courthouse in London. He was accused of stabbing corpses with wooden stakes, which he denied for the rest of his life. And he served 3 years in jail. He was sentenced to 5, but he served 3. He was an interesting guy. I highly recommend researching him more. He was also accused of being many things throughout the years. He was accused of doing nude rituals in the cemetery. He was accused of practicing dark magic. He did practice Wicca, and he said he practiced white magic, it makes sense that people would think that he's like some creepy black magic practitioner because of like stereotypes around Wicca. Towards the end of his life, he did settle down a bit. He had a family, lots of friends. He actually passed